Welcome back. All right, this is going to be a juicy episode. So, today we are going to dive into all things about trust, about trusting yourself, and really learning how to build the muscle of self trust. And this will lead you to not only achieving what you really want, all the goals that you really have, but also in feeling more aligned and feeling more successful while you are achieving it. So this idea of building self-trust, it honestly never really occurred to me until just a few years ago. So until I started really going through, coach certification, and the coaching certification that I went through, is based in neuroscience and positive psychology and cognitive behavior and performance science. And so during all of those training sessions, we were learning about intuition. And as a coach, it's really important and it's our job to be able to lean into our own intuition. So, what could be coming up for us during a session, but what could be coming up for a client during a session that they're not saying, what's underneath what they're saying, what could be blocking them, and tuning into also what intuition do they tap into? Do they see things more, visually? Do they respond more to words? So us developing our own muscle of intuition, but then also helping our clients to develop intuition. So this was honestly a whole new world for me a couple years ago when I was diving into this. And we're learning about the different types of intuition. So if you don't know this yet, or if you've heard of this, there's really, based on the research, there's really four different types of intuition. So the first one is clairaudience. So clairaudience, this sounds like someone talking in your mind. When I say it, it sounds kind of crazy, like you have voices in your head, but it really is. It's this calm, sort of even tone voice, typically talking to you. So saying things. Do you hear your own name sometimes? Do you hear a voice that's, sort of saying something to you, or kind of this like light bulb moment? But the key here is that it is a voice. So it's something talking to you. The second type of intuition is clairvoyance. So this one is more of an image or a scene that you would see in your mind. So if you see, images pop up in your mind, if you see like scenes or things that are kind of metaphor for things that pop up out of the blue, but the more of the visual image, that is clairvoyance. The third type is clairsentience. And this comes through, I believe this is one of the most common ones. I think the ones that people probably hear about the most. And this really comes through as a feeling. So if you have that sort of gut instinct, if you're like, oh, I just had this gut feeling. If you are also reading and being able to pick up on sort of the emotions of other people, that is that clairsentience. And then the fourth one is claircognizance. And this is where your brain gets sort of downloads from your intuition. So I was reading this in a Mind, Body, Green article, and they were explaining it as kind of like when a computer gets a download of a large file. That sort of is claircognizance, where all of a sudden your brain gets this big download, but it's coming from your intuition. So those are really the four types. And up until a few years ago, as I mentioned, when I was getting certified as a coach and all of that, I hadn't really heard about these. And I remember learning about them, and I never felt like I was very intuitive. I always felt like I was a very logical person, making lists, pros and cons lists, weighing out all of these different options. If we go back to my first episodes as that recovering perfectionist, always trying to have all of the information, make the pros and cons, get everybody else's opinions on my decision. And really more of that logical is what I felt like I was. And to be honest, before I really dove into the world of coaching and self-development, it all sounded a little bit hokey to me. So I'm curious, if you're listening to this, if you're someone who is really in tune with your own intuition, or if you're how I was a few years ago and you're like, I don't really understand what that means. Either way, this is for you. So keep listening in. So I remember, learning about these things and really trying to figure out, so which one am I, and how do I continue to build that? And as I started to learn more about myself and increase my own self-awareness, and as I started to understand more about this, and I dove into the science side of things, so I really think it's important for us to always examine, the science side of some of this as well. And as I leaned into this more myself, I began to unlock more of my own intuition. And why I'm talking about intuition is because as you lean more into your intuition, as you trust yourself, as you build that muscle of following your gut, you build that self-trust. So for me, as I started to get more clear about it, understand myself more, and unlock my own intuition, I started to build self-trust. And when you start to build your self-trust, you also start to build your confidence. And so what we're going to talk about is how do we help you to build that own intuition, to build your self-trust, to build your confidence, to be able to achieve the things you want. And again, have them aligned so you're not having all this external success, but it's not really who you are or who you want to be anyways. And oftentimes when that happens, and I see this with my high-performing clients who have achieved all of these goals, oftentimes it's coming from a place of it wasn't aligned to you or isn't aligned to you anymore because you aren't trusting yourself. You aren't listening to yourself, and so you're out of alignment. And so when I started to dig into this and I started to look back on my life and all of these pivotal moments that I've had in my life, I realized that self-trust was actually a huge piece of my story. When I look back at decisions I made, changes I made, things that led me here to where I am now, doing what I am now, trusting myself was the theme. You know, I once heard someone say, I was listening into this training, and someone was saying, look back at your life and see what's the theme, what's the chorus that is playing throughout your life, the thing that kept coming up. And for me, self-trust was it. When I trust myself, it leads me to where I want to be. And I realized that that was my course. That is my theme. And that's why I'm so passionate about talking about it now and helping people to be able to build that self-trust, to build that, to be able to build your confidence, to be able to build your results. So I look back and, these pivotal moments, things like just trusting my own inner guide and my own voice as a kid to not do things that were outside of my values. While I didn't know I was following my intuition, while I didn't know about my own self-trust, I knew that I was sticking to what my values were. And so now looking back, it's like, wow, trusting myself, that is what allowed me to go for the things I wanted to and not be pulled in directions for things that I didn't want to, that weren't aligned to my values. Another big moment for me was when I switched majors in college. So again, it didn't make sense to most people because I was going to be a teacher. I was going to be in education from the time I was in kindergarten all the way up to I was already in college and I was in the program. And I started to have this feeling that it was no longer aligned for me and who I had become, who I wanted to be, and where I wanted to go. And so I had to trust myself that, a couple years into college already, that I was going to make this change. And it maybe logically it didn't make sense to people, but it made sense to me. Trusting myself with jobs. So especially when I first got out of college, my first couple jobs, I left jobs because of a gut feeling that didn't feel aligned. And I remember the logical side being, there was this, you have to be in a job in a certain amount of time, otherwise it's going to look bad. And I had that in my head. But in my gut, the places that I was at that didn't feel aligned, I couldn't explain all of it, but it just didn't feel right. And now after that, these moments where it's like, wow, when you trust yourself, you see what happens. So one of the first ones that I left that didn't feel aligned was just this gut feeling. They ended up going bankrupt and closing not that much longer after. And the other one ended up doing layoffs shortly after. And I trusted my own gut to leave those. And I didn't know it then, but I could connect the dots looking back. Even going into business. So, logically going into starting my own business during a pandemic when Jake, my husband, was newer into his business, it didn't necessarily make sense, but I trusted myself and it felt right. Business decisions, health issues. I talked about my story a lot on one of the previous episodes, and I had to lean into so much self-trust, and I trusted that every time that I got a you're fine, or a test that was negative, or a doctor that was dismissive, or another dead end for something, that there was still an answer out there. And even though it took me years, that self-trust led me to answers, which is now leading me to healing. I want you to think about, as you start to look back, what is that theme for you? That thing that keeps standing out? Is it self-trust for you? Is it something else? But what are those moments that you can look back and go, wow, I trusted myself in that moment and it's led me to here? Because we want to start to anchor into those and figure out what is it about you and what were you doing then so that we can keep building that. Now, I want to tell you this story to still this day kind of, shocks me that it all happened. And I want to tell you the story of something that happened around my own trust. So about a year ago, my son Sawyer and I, at the time he was about 5, and we were playing outside. Jake was gone for the weekend, and we were playing outside, and this man came walking through the yards, which is pretty strange. I kind of live out in the country a little bit, and he's walking through the yards and looking around, and he comes to tell us that, they were looking for the dog, a dog Maya that gotten it out. It was their daughter's dog, Maya, and she got out. It was this husky mix, and they were looking for her through the yards. And I said, you know what, we'll keep an eye out. We go inside. A little bit later, I see him and his wife park on the street, get out of their car, and start walking through the yards again and walking. And they said that somebody had a tip that she was walking behind the houses. And just for some context of where we live, behind our house is a couple 100 acres of preserved land. So there are no houses behind our house. It's preserved land for hunting. It's got trails and things like this. So he said that someone saw her limping and taking off back into this area. So as I mentioned, Jake wasn't home. And here's the thing. I'm not technically a member of this land. So you have to be a member. And even though it's in our backyard, you have to be a member to be able to utilize it, to walk it and things like that. So I call him and I told him the story and I said, I just have this feeling that she's back there. I just have this feeling that she's hurt and she's back there and that I'm supposed to go look for her. And nothing against him. He wasn't being dismissive, but he pretty much said, I'm sure she's going to turn up. I'm sure if she was back there, she's probably not back there anymore. And kind of just said, you're not really supposed to go back there. We could get in trouble if you're caught walking back there. So I hung up and I was like, all right, I won't do it. A few minutes later, I call him back because this feeling in my gut was not going away. I felt like she was back there and that it was my job to go find her and that I just knew she was back there. So I called him and I said, screw it. And Sawyer and I take off and we start walking back there to look for her. And, this is hundreds of acres. And I say, we're going to walk down this one trail and we're going to walk from our house to the other side down, get all the way through it to the road. And if we don't find her on this one trail, we'll go back. Because I had my son with me. I couldn't just be out and about all day. So we start walking and we made it all the way through the other side to the road. And I was like, all right, you know what? Let's turn back. We start walking back and I cannot make this up. And it gives me goosebumps every time I say it. I glance over my left shoulder and there is a bunch of thick brush and bushes and you really can't see much over there. I glance for a second and I see this little white sticking out. And I have to do a double take and I get closer and sure enough, I see this white husky mix and she is stuck in this mud all the way up to her neck. I still can't believe it even when I say it. I shouldn't have seen her. The way that this was, I shouldn't have seen her in there. If you could have seen it, the chances of me seeing her there, I have no idea how I saw her. Now the tough part starts is because here I have my son. I don't know this dog and she is stuck. So I start calling to her and I can tell that she can't get out and she can't even actually move. So unknowingly, I just sort of step into this mud to try and help her. And I realize then that it is like quicksand. I have never been in a situation like this. It's like quicksand and you sink right in. And so now I realize that here I am stuck up to my waist and I've got my son on one side and I've got this dog next to me. And I remember thinking, well, I can't stay stuck. I can't just leave my son here scared and this dog, sitting here. So I somehow muster up being able to move and I start trying to pull on her collar to get her out. My heart is racing and this adrenaline is kicking in. And, how am I going to pull a husky out of this muck? And I start trying to pull on her without also her biting me. I don't know this dog. She's scared. And so I'm trying to figure out how to pull her out when I realize that her leg is hurt and she can't move. Even if she could get out of this muck, she can't move, trying to get out. So I end up getting myself out and I don't even have the number for these people. So again, by the grace of who knows what, I have an idea, and I look up, we have a next door neighbors app, and I find a posting that they did, and I find their number, and I get in touch with them, and I get a hold of them, and I have to guide them back to us. I have to tell them how to take the trail to get to us and how to find us. And they get back there, and it is this older couple, and I'm sitting here thinking, how are we going to get her out? And all three of us are in the mud, up to our waist, pulling her out, trying not to get stuck ourselves. We end up getting her out. She can't walk. So I end up running back up to the house, getting our four-wheeler, and this older gentleman grabs her and carries her, and I drive them back to their truck. And they didn't even have words themselves, I don't think at that time, to thank me and to really understand what would have happened. We all agreed that had I not gone back there, no one would have found her. Looking back in the logical sense, I shouldn't have even found her. All the things were stacked against me. And somehow, all of it had to come together. And it all started with trusting myself. And, they ended up sending me this most amazing bouquet of flowers and this card with a picture of Maya saying she was doing great, and a picture of their granddaughter whose dog, it was their daughter and the granddaughter. And I tell you this story because, first of all, it was one of the most amazing experiences I've ever had. And it all started with trusting myself. And every time I have trusted myself, it has been the right decision. It has led me to where I'm meant to be and what I'm meant to do. Every time, we'll repeat that. Every time I have trusted myself, it has been the right decision and led to where I was meant to be. And I want to challenge you to think about, how often are you listening to your own gut, to your own intuition, whatever you want to call it? How often are you listening to it? Because that builds your self-trust, which builds your confidence. And I want to give you a few tools that you can use to start building this. So a couple ways that you can develop this. The first thing is start tuning into what type of intuition is strongest for you. So of the 4 that we mentioned earlier, and if you aren't sure, you want to start there. So really start to figure out which one of these am I. So for me personally, I believe I'm a mix of sort of this clairsentience where I get that gut feeling, and the clairaudience where I actually have sort of that voice that will say things to me. Last year I attended this conference and I was able to see Jamie Kern-Lima speak, who is an amazing speaker, has an amazing story. And she was talking about trusting yourself. And I can recall the exact moment, the saying and the feeling I had where literally in my mind, in my head, I heard a voice saying to me, it's time, and the word truth. And I spent a lot of time digging into and unpacking what that means, and that's for another day. But I heard that voice saying that to me, which is how I kind of know which one I lean towards. So start tuning in for yourself and become more aware of this. Are you more hearing the voice? Are you hearing the words? Are you seeing pictures? Is it more of just a feeling that you get? And then when it comes to actually, once you determine which one you are, there's different ways to start developing that. So if you're that clairaudience where, it's that voice, try and find the moments where you can sit in silence more, where you can, silence all of the noise and the clutter in our minds that we have so that you can actually listen to what is that voice saying. If you're more of the clairvoyance, with the images, be on the lookout for images that are popping into your head sort of out of the blue, and what are they and why are they coming up? When are they coming up, and what are they of that they could be telling you? If it's more of that clairsentience, more of that feeling, tune in when you get a strong gut feeling, when you get this strong sort of intuitive pull, write it down and lean into it. And then the claircognizance, the next time you're trying to figure out something that's really complicated, or you're stuck and your logical brain isn't getting there, just ask your intuition to give you an answer. And sometimes we just get so, especially if you're like me, where you get so hung up in the logical side of your brain and all of the details and trying to figure it all out, sometimes we need to calm that and silence that and really just lean into that intuition. So other ways to really build this and build that self-trust is getting to know yourself. If you don't know yourself, it's going to be really hard to build that self-trust. So getting to know who you are outside of just the labels. Who are you as a person? What do you value? If you haven't done a values exercise or if you haven't revisited in a while, that is your homework to do. Get clear. What are your top values? And how often are you putting those values into action? It's one thing to value, health and wellness, but if you're never putting it into action, then you're most likely feeling really off. It's one thing to value travel, but if you're not able to do it, it's one thing to value, whatever it might be, but being able to actually put it into action is a different thing. So getting clear on who you are, getting clear on what your values are, and your boundaries. What are boundaries that you have in your personal life, in your work life, in your relationships, in your own work, and getting clear on those. Once you know these things, then you can start to make choices more aligned to those. And if you're feeling off in different areas of your life, burned out, stressed, overwhelmed, fearful, doubtful, it's most likely because you are misaligned from those values. So the more you know yourself, the more you will know when something's off, and the more you will know if you're not following that self-trust. So the other thing is knowing your own inner critic, knowing that own inner dialogue and monologue that plays. And we will certainly dive into this more in future episodes, but be aware of those, of your own inner critic and thoughts that pop up that are really going to cause you to doubt yourself, so that you can start to put this plan in place on what you're going to do to counter those. Another way for you to really build your self-trust is to do what you say you will for yourself. Keep the commitments and the promises to yourself. We keep all of these commitments and promises to everybody else. Like, we most likely won't let other people down. We will let ourselves down before we let anyone else down. Why are we breaking promises to ourselves? We are the most important person. That's not selfish. You need to take care of you before you can take care of other people. So why are you breaking the promises to yourself? I think we're all guilty of doing it. When we break promises to ourselves, we are telling ourselves that we cannot trust ourselves. Think if somebody, a friend, a family member, were to constantly be promising things to you or saying things to you and then not committing to them. Would we trust them anymore? No, it starts to take away from that trust. But we have broken these commitments and promises and things we would do to ourselves so many times that now we can't trust ourselves, and we can rebuild that. Do what you said you were going to do. What promises have you made to yourself that you keep breaking? And what do you need to do to put in place? Is it the thing that you keep saying you're going to do that's off? Maybe that's just not something you can commit to right now. How do we change that so that you can get these wins? Make it a smaller goal. Break it down into like a bite size so that you can kind of stack up these wins, because as you stack, you are proving to yourself that you can trust yourself. Show yourself, prove to yourself that you can trust you. And as you build this self-trust, you build your confidence. When we talk about self-trust, it doesn't mean that you have all the answers all the time. It's not like you're always going to have the answers. It's that you trust that you can figure it out. So I hope you found this episode helpful. I hope that you take my stories and lessons and apply them to your own life, and that you start using these tools to develop your own self-trust. I would also absolutely love to hear how you are starting to implement these in your life. Share this with others, tag me, and reach out and let me know how you are using these tools to build your own self-trust.